October 12, 2023. Just past midnight, in the quiet town of Maplewood, Ohio, a horrifying crime was uncovered. A teenage boy, barely 17, was found lifeless in a wooded area just beyond the outskirts of town. His body was broken, bruised, and bound. He had been defiled in the most inhuman way. Sodomy. The scene was brutal, too brutal for a random act of violence. This was personal. This was a message. The coroner's report would later confirm what investigators already suspected. The boy had been beaten mercilessly and raped before his death. His hands were cuffed behind his back, restraints identical to those used by law enforcement officers. Who could have access to handcuffs? Who could give him access to a gun and handcuffs? How did a teenager die so miserably? Was it really suicide? His body bore deep lacerations, evidence of a prolonged attack. But the most chilling detail? He had been strangled. That was the cause of his heart. The gunshot wound came later. The killer had wanted him to suffer and then covered their tracks. The discovery sent shockwaves through the town. But what no one knew yet was that the person responsible wasn't a stranger lurking in the night. It wasn't some violent criminal on the run. It was a man sworn to uphold the law. A man who wore a badge. That man was Officer Daniel Reeves. Reeves had spent over 15 years on the force. Respected by his peers. He was a man who commanded authority the moment he stepped into a room. But outside his uniform, he was a different person. Angry. Controlling. A husband who believed his wife belonged to him and no one else. But who could blame a husband for feeling betrayed? Who could blame a husband for wanting to protect his wife and end an affair that was destroying his beautiful family? For years, those close to Reeves had whispered about his temper. His possessiveness. The way he seemed to see his marriage as something he didn't quite deserve. His wife, Emily Reeves, had been a nursing student when he met her. She was from a wealthy family and they didn't think he deserved their daughter. But Emily was in love, or so she thought, and soon they got married as soon as she got pregnant. But their marriage wasn't perfect. No. 6 months in and Emily had a divorce that made her question her decision. She didn't want to marry him anymore. She had lost her baby and she was having a second thought. Daniel had begged her. Convinced her and finally, they picked up the pieces and continued their marriage. But was she truly satisfied? Was Daniel ever going to trust his wife again? Was Emily ever going to fully be happy in her marriage? The true test of their bond came when an underage boy was thrown into the mix. An encounter that would change their lives forever. The affair of Emily Reeves and Hakeem Usman began in an unexpected place, right in the small room of Westbrook General Hospital. Hakeem, a quiet and reserved 17-year-old high school kid, wasn't the type to draw attention to himself. He was a troublemaker and an athlete that grew popular with the girls and on the football pitch. But one rainy Wednesday, his paths crossed with the one woman who would change. After a schoolyard fight left him with a cut above his eyebrow, he found himself in the hospital, needing stitches. The sterile atmosphere of the ER was unfamiliar to Hakeem. He'd never liked hospitals, his parents were dead and after he had spent most of his life in foster homes, he was finally adopted by his maternal grandmother. Hakeem lived a tough life. Until he met Emily Reeves. Emily Reeves, a nurse at Westbrook General, was assigned to treat Hakeem's wound. She was in her late 30s, with soft brown hair that she kept neatly tied back and eyes that had a way of making people feel at ease. When she entered the room, Hakeem wasn't prepared for the immediate connection he felt, though neither of them could have understood it at the time. Emily was a professional, of course, but there was something about the way she interacted with him, her patience, her attentiveness, that set her apart from the other staff members. She was calm, almost serene, a piece in Hakim's stormy life. As she cleaned the wound and stitched it, Emily didn't rush through the process as many nurses did. She took her time, tending to him with a care that Hakim hadn't expected. But more than just the physical treatment, there was something about the way she made him feel, like he wasn't just another patient in a long line of injured teenagers. She listened when he spoke, paying attention to the smallest details, making him feel like he was worth more than just a quick examination and a bandage. After finishing, Emily wrapped his head in a bandage and told him to follow up if necessary. But it wasn't the end of their connection. Hakim couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted inside him. He wasn't used to someone showing such genuine interest, especially not in someone like him, an orphan, a colored kid from a broken home. Emily had made him feel seen, and for the first time in a long time, he felt like he mattered. In the following weeks, Hakim found himself returning to the hospital more often than necessary. He would come up with small injuries, scrapes, bruises, anything to keep the visits going. It wasn't that he needed more medical care, but simply that he craved the presence of Caroline. He didn't know what it was about her, but he found himself drawn to her in ways he couldn't explain. Emily was kind, compassionate, and she made him feel understood in ways no one else did. Emily, on the other hand, began to notice a pattern. Hakim started coming to the hospital regularly, each time with a small injury or reason to be seen. She didn't think much of it at first, chalking it up to coincidence. But as the visits continued, something began to change in her as well. She started looking forward to his visits. There was a quiet, almost unspoken understanding between them. Hakim would sit in the examination room, waiting for her to finish with other patients, and they would talk, about nothing important, just small talk at first, but it was enough to create a bond. She noticed how guarded he was, how his eyes would sometimes drift off, lost in thought, as if carrying the weight of things he couldn't articulate. But there was something else too, an openness in his gaze when he looked at her, an unspoken plea for something more, something she couldn't quite put into words. As she worked, Emily found herself curious about him in a way she hadn't been about anyone in years, and she found herself drawn to him, even as she tried to maintain professional distance. Over time, their connection deepened, not through words, but through shared moments of silence and understanding. Hakim began to open up, talking about his life, his childhood, his foster homes, the loneliness he felt. Emily listened, giving him the space to share things he had never spoken about to anyone. She didn't offer advice or quick solutions, but simply listened, and in that listening, she became a safe space for him. Emily, too, found herself sharing more than she had with anyone in a long time. She spoke of her own struggles, her dissatisfaction with her marriage to Daniel, her law enforcement officer husband, and the loneliness that had begun to permeate her life. She wasn't unfaithful yet, but there was something between her and Hakim. There was a recognition in her own heart that she was beginning to lean on Hakim in ways that were becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. What started as simple companionship during Hakim's hospital visits grew into something more profound. Emily began to look forward to seeing him, not just out of duty, but because she felt a connection to him that she didn't feel with her own husband. She didn't want to admit it, but she was slowly becoming emotionally attached to Hakim. She couldn't pinpoint exactly when it happened, when a simple nurse-patient relationship morphed into something much more complicated, but the bond was undeniable. As weeks turned into months, Hakim's feelings deepened as well. He began to look forward to their time together in the hospital more than anything else. He didn't want to admit it either, but Emily had become a lifeline for him. She was the one person who made him feel seen, heard, understood. He never talked to anyone about his feelings, but he found himself drawn to her in a way that he couldn't explain. It wasn't just attraction, though that was certainly part of it. After all, Emily was a very pretty woman. But this was beyond looks, it was something deeper, something he couldn't define. The way Emily looked at him, the way she made him feel like he was important, even though he was just a kid with a troubled past. It was Hakim that made the first move one afternoon. It was cold and Emily had been having a headache when Hakim offered to give her a head massage. Somehow, this had progressed downwards. In a few minutes, Emily locked her office windows as they made out right on the examination table. It was an exhilarating experience and it wasn't the last of its kind. Months after months, Hakim continued to show up in Emily's office and each afternoon, they had sex on her office desk, in her car and in the park close to his school. It was an unlikely affair and Emily tried to tell herself she deserved to live a little. But how long could this damning secret remain hidden? How long could she betray her husband? The real question is, what can you hide from a man that knows just how to spot a liar and find the truth? The dark days of secrecy were over for Emily and Hakim. Daniel Reeves, her husband, had long suspected something was off. His instincts as a law enforcement officer over the years had helped him pick up the small clues. First, it was Hakim's repeated visits. For times, he dropped by to give her lunch or drop the keys, and all 4 times, Hakim had been lingering around her office building. Hakim was handsome. And he looked at Daniel in a strange way. Not the way a kid looked at a man. But like a man who was fighting for dominance. Then there was another sign, the strange way his wife would act when she returned from the hospital. He hadn't confronted her yet, but he knew that it was only a matter of time before the truth would surface. He waited. He watched. And finally, it did. One morning, while Daniel was changing his wife's tires, he found a wallet in her back seat. It belonged to a teenage boy. Hakim Usman. The same boy always seen at the hospital lingering by her office. Daniel was hurt. He was broken. And he acted without thinking. The next day, Hakim had gotten a speeding ticket one afternoon, just a few days before he was set to leave for college. Nervous about getting into trouble with the authorities, Hakim tried to beg his way out of it. This was when Daniel saw an opportunity. He invited Hakim to meet him at the police station, under the pretense of talking about the ticket. At first, Hakim was taken aback. He was nervous, unsure why the officer wanted to discuss something so trivial. After a few words exchanged about the ticket, Jack did what he did best, he shifted the mood, tried to ease the tension. Hakim wasn't supposed to drink. He had no business with a bar since he was underaged. And most importantly, he knew who Daniel was. Emily's husband. For 2 years, their secret affair had been kept just that. A secret. But that didn't mean he didn't know just who he was messing with. Having this invitation felt surreal. But he didn't want to be a weakling, he agreed. After the first meeting with Daniel, Hakim told Emily all about it. He told her he was suspicious, but Emily assured him nothing was wrong. Daniel had no clue and he completely trusted her. However, just to be safe, they didn't meet for the next few days. But this did nothing to dissuade Daniel Reeves from the horrible revenge he had planned out. Hakim was at ease that nothing had happened the first time. And so when he got a call from Daniel a few days later, asking him if he wanted to meet at the bar later that night, mentioning something about a family member wanting advice on how to choose the right college, he didn't hesitate to help out. When he arrived, Daniel said his niece might be running a little late and quickly ordered them a few shots. As they waited, Daniel brought up conversation just to put him at ease and Hakim fell for his tricks. He even mentioned his upcoming plans to go to college the next day. There was a nervousness in his voice as he spoke about leaving, but Daniel didn't seem to notice. Instead, he offered Hakeem more alcohol, just a bit more, he said. It wasn't long before Hakeem found himself drunk, more than he intended. In the haze of alcohol, he felt vulnerable. But Daniel patted him on the shoulders and said he was becoming a man and then offered to take him home. He helped Hakeem into the back of his police van, still chatting amiably, like nothing was wrong. But soon, the drive took longer and they were on a quiet road that didn't lead to his home. Or anywhere in their little town that Hakeem knew. It was then that Hakeem began to feel uneasy. The sirens of the van blared loudly as they drove down quiet, empty streets. Daniel didn't seem to be in a hurry, and even when Hakeem asked where they were headed, he didn't respond. Hakeem's heart began to race, and he felt an uncomfortable chill crawl up his spine. Hakeem was a handsome boy. He had facial hair. He was way taller for his age and he had the features of a very attractive man. He was a heartbreaker and many girls fawned over him. But he had eyes only for one woman. Emily Reeves. And that was the passion that dug his grave. In a flash, everything changed. Daniel didn't say a word as he pulled out his cuffs and bound him. Hakeem tried to scream. He tried to fight as life flashed before his eyes. But Daniel was older, stronger and more experienced. In a few seconds, he pulled duct tape over his mouth, dragged him to the back seat and with the siren still on, rapes Hakeem, over and over again, until the boy was bloody and bruised and barely breathing. Then finally, as he uncuffed him, he decided his work was done. Daniel, a police officer meant to save lives and protect the weak, decided to take revenge in the most brutal way. Murder. After strangling Hakeem, watching the light fade from his eyes and the last breath leaving him, he shot his dead body. The body was unceremoniously dumped from the police van, its lifeless form rolling out onto the cold asphalt. Daniel took careful steps to stage the scene. He placed the gun in Hakeem's hand, making sure it looked like a suicide, something that could easily be dismissed. There was no bloodshed where there shouldn't be, no signs of struggle, no trace of what had really occurred. When Jack returned home, he acted as though nothing had happened. Emily, unaware of what had transpired, greeted him with a warm, comforting embrace. She had no reason to suspect a thing. Daniel was the same man he had always been. He spoke of the night as though it were another ordinary evening, nothing more than a quiet, routine visit to the station. Emily had no reason to doubt him. He had come home late, but that was nothing new. He'd been working long hours before, often staying late at the precinct. She believed the lie, just as she had every other time. She kissed him on the cheek and suggested they enjoy the rest of the evening together. She didn't know that she had just kissed the man who had taken her lover's life. The following morning, the body was discovered by local authorities during a routine patrol. Hakeem's death was initially ruled as a suicide. No one questioned it at first. It seemed plausible, a troubled young man, possibly overwhelmed by the pressures of life, had ended his own life. Emily, devastated by the news of Hakeem's death, mourned, but there was a disconnect in her grief. She could not fully process the loss of someone who had been so important to her. She couldn't let her husband see her grief. So she hid it, drowning herself in work for the next few days. As time passed, Daniel felt a growing satisfaction in his deeds. He had eliminated the threat to his marriage, to his pride, and had covered his tracks flawlessly. But like all secrets, his couldn't be hidden forever. 6 days after Hakeem's death, an anonymous call came to the widow, Hakeem's grandmother. She was told that a certain police officer was last seen with him the night of his death. He had not only issued a speeding ticket to Hakim but had also made him drink alcohol, something that was illegal for Hakim to do. This was a way for Hakim's best friend to help find his friend's murderer. He knew about Hakim's affair with Emily and he suspected that the cop had killed Hakim. An investigation was launched and eventually, the truth about Jack's involvement in Hakim's death began to surface. Emily, who had been in denial, finally confronted her husband. The alibi wasn't adding up. Daniel, who lied about never meeting with Hakim, suddenly agreed to sharing a few drinks with him. But the question was clear. Why did he lie? Why did he take an underaged boy to drink at a bar? Daniel was finally arrested a week after the anonymous tip. Cornered and unable to keep the lies straight, Daniel finally confessed. He admitted that he had known about the affair but denied killing Hakim, claiming that he had only driven him home while he was intoxicated. However, the evidence spoke for itself. The town began to question everything they had once believed about Daniel Reeves, the once prestigious cop. For Hakim's mother, the pain of losing her son was unbearable. She had spent days and nights searching for answers, grieving, and holding on to the hope that there had been some mistake. But the truth was too brutal to deny. Her son had been taken from her not by some random act of fate, but by the very hands of a man who was supposed to protect and serve. How many of us truly know the people we think we do? How many of us have placed our trust in someone, only to find out that trust was a lie? How could someone who had vowed to uphold the law turn into a monster? Hakim's story serves as a heartbreaking reminder of the fragility of human connections, and how easily trust can be shattered. Revenge is best served cold, but sometimes, the best revenge is simply walking away. For Daniel Reeves, this was an act that would destroy his life forever. For Emily Reeves, the guilt would always live with her. And to the community, many would wonder what lies in the heart of the most honorable men. In the end, justice may be served, but no amount of justice can bring back the life that was lost.